Hi, everyone. I'm Marcus Thompson, 35 years old. I work as a chef in Miami where the ocean breeze carries stories of broken families and hidden secrets. I built my restaurant from nothing after running away from a childhood filled with pain. But to understand how I became who I am today, I need to take you back to Riverside, Ohio, the small town where I grew up, where memories of both joy and heartbreak still wake me up at night. Riverside in the 1990s was a quiet place, with brick houses and kids playing in every yard. My family lived in a big white house where my mom Sarah's singing filled every room with warmth. Mom was like sunshine to me, a lady with bright eyes and arms that made everything better when she hugged me. She taught me how to bake cookies, how to catch fireflies, and that even when life gets hard, there's always something good if you look for it. I remember summer days in our kitchen, smelling fresh bread while she told me stories about brave nights and magical places that made me believe in wonder. My dad, Robert Thompson, owned the biggest car shop in town called Thompson Motors. He worked long hours, but when he came home, he always brought me something special, a toy truck, a comic book, or just the biggest smile that made me feel like the most important kid in the world. But everything changed when I turned 9 years old. Mom got very sick with something called lung cancer, and that means sickness took her away in 6 months. I still remember her last day in the white hospital bed, her voice weak, but still trying to sing to me. Marcus, you be brave for me, okay? I'll always watch over you from heaven. Those were her final words before she closed her eyes and never opened them again. Mom's funeral felt like a bad dream, where I was floating somewhere else. I just remember people crying, rain hitting the windows, and feeling like my whole world had broken into pieces. Dad, who was always so strong, cried with me that day, holding me so tight I thought he'd never let go. After Mom died, Dad became a different person. He threw himself into fixing cars like it would fix his broken heart, leaving me alone in our big house that felt cold without Mom's laughter. I started feeling invisible, walking through rooms like a ghost, trying to find pieces of Mom in her favorite coffee cup or the flowers she planted. Then when I was 11, Dad brought Linda home. Linda was a short woman with curly red hair and green eyes that felt like ice. She came with her 2 kids, Tyler and Madison, like unwelcome visitors taking over our home. Dad said Linda was going to be my new mom now. But from the first second I saw her, I knew she could never replace my real mom. Linda changed everything about our house. She moved Mom's pictures to the basement, threw away Mom's favorite blanket, and made new rules about everything from what we ate for dinner to what TV shows we could watch. Dad seemed happy with Linda, but he didn't see how she treated me when he wasn't looking. Tyler, who was 2 years older than me, was mean and always tried to get me in trouble. Madison, 1 year younger, would break things and blame me for it. From day one, they made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. Tyler would call me names like Mommy's boy when Dad and Linda weren't around. Madison liked to hide my homework or mess up my room, then laugh when I got upset about it. Linda not only let them do these things, she helped them do it. She said mean things to me like I was a problem she had to deal with. Marcus, why can't you be more like Tyler and Madison? They're so much easier to handle, she'd say with a fake sweet voice that had poison in it. One time I heard her tell Dad that I reminded him too much of my mom, and that was keeping him from being happy. I tried to tell Dad what was happening, but he just looked tired and said I needed to give Linda a chance. Linda's trying her best, Marcus. You need to be patient with her, he said, without really listening to me. I couldn't blame him completely. He was trying to build a new life after losing Mom. But every time he didn't believe me, I felt like I was losing his love too. The years that came next were like living in a prison. At school, I became the quiet kid who ate lunch alone. Other kids started calling me weird because I spent recess drawing pictures of Mom or writing in a notebook she gave me. At home, I tried to stay away from Linda and her kids, but they always found ways to hurt me. When I was 13, Tyler broke a model airplane that Mom and I built together. I got so angry I pushed him, and Linda appeared right then. She didn't ask what happened. She just slapped me hard across the face. "How dare you touch my son? You little brat," she screamed, hugging Tyler like he was the one who got hurt. When Dad heard the story, he just sighed and told me to say sorry. I wouldn't say sorry. Instead, I ran to my room, locked the door, and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. All these hurts piled up like rocks on my chest that I carried everywhere. I started dreaming about leaving Riverside, getting away from Linda, Tyler, and Madison. I imagined going somewhere far away where nobody knew my story, where I could start fresh. But back then, I was just a 13-year-old kid with no money, no way out, just Mom's notebook and memories to keep me going. One night when I was 14, I found Mom's recipe book hidden in my closet. Her handwriting was like finding treasure in the darkness. She wrote little notes about me, about how much she loved me and hoped I'd grow up strong and kind. "My sweet Marcus, you are my greatest gift. Never let anyone tell you that you're not worth everything," she wrote. I read those words over and over like they were magic spells. The recipe book became my safe place where I wrote down all my angry feelings, my loneliness, and my dreams of escape. I promised Mom and myself that someday I would leave this place. I wouldn't let Linda or anyone else decide who I was. My last years of high school passed slowly and quietly. I worked hard in school not to make Dad or Linda happy, but because I knew learning was my ticket out. I spent hours in the library reading cookbooks and business magazines. I dreamed of a future where I could stand on my own, where I didn't have to bow down to anybody. When I turned 17, Dad started talking about me taking over Thompson Motors someday. He called me into his office where old pictures of cars covered the walls and talked about keeping the family business alive. "Marcus, this shop will be yours one day," he said, sounding proud. But I didn't feel proud. I felt trapped, and part of me wondered if he really wanted to have it or if he just felt guilty. For all the years he ignored me. Linda, of course, hated this idea. I heard her telling Dad that I wasn't responsible enough to run anything, that Tyler would be much better at it. Tyler, who was 19 and only cared about video games and causing trouble, was better than me in her mind. It hurt, but I wasn't surprised. When I turned 18, I got accepted to culinary school in New York City. It was the first ray of hope I'd felt in years. I knew this was my chance to escape the house full of sadness and build my own life. I packed my bags, taking Mom's recipe book and some photos of us together, getting ready for the biggest adventure of my life. The night before I left, I looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't the crying 13-year-old anymore. I was taller, stronger, but inside I still carried the pain of losing Mom, Dad's distance, and all the scars from Linda, Tyler, and Madison. I promised myself I wouldn't let the past control my future. I would build something new, something that would make Mom proud of me. So I left Riverside, carrying painful memories but also fierce hope. I got on a bus leaving town early one morning when fog still covered the quiet streets. In my backpack, I had just a few clothes, Mom's recipe book, and our old photos. I didn't look back because I didn't want to see the house where I felt like a stranger for so many years. I was 18, broke, with no family support. But I had something. Linda, Tyler, and Madison could never steal from me. Dreams. The bus took me to New York City where I would start culinary school at the Institute of Culinary Education. I picked this school not just because they gave me money to attend, but because it was far enough from Riverside to let me breathe freely. When the bus stopped at Port Authority, I stood surrounded by millions of people and giant buildings. My heart felt excited and scared at the same time. This was my chance to start over, but it was also the first time I had to face life with nobody backing me up. My dorm room was tiny with one bed, a small desk, and a window that looked at a brick wall. My roommate Jake was a guy from Texas with a big smile and loud laugh. "Hey, Marcus, where are you from?" he asked as I dragged my suitcase inside. I hesitated because I didn't want to talk about Riverside or my family. "Just a small town. Nothing interesting," I said, and Jake nodded without asking more questions. I was thankful for that. The first days at culinary school hit me like a tornado of new experiences. I felt overwhelmed by the classes, the complicated cooking techniques, and students who seemed way more confident than me. I studied cooking partly because I remember making food with Mom, but also because I wanted to prove I could create something beautiful without Dad or anyone else helping me. But school life wasn't as easy as I hoped. The scholarship paid for classes, but I needed money for food, books, and basic things like shampoo and toothbrushes, which made me realize I needed a job fast. I got hired as a dishwasher at a busy restaurant called Marco's, where the smell of garlic and herbs filled my evenings and the sound of clattering plates never stopped. The job took up most of my free time, but it gave me freedom I never had in Riverside. Working at Marco's also taught me how to talk to new people. I was naturally shy, always keeping walls up because I was afraid of getting hurt like I did as a kid. But here, I had to work with cooks, servers, and managers, and sometimes listen to their stories about life. There was an old Italian cook named Giuseppe who worked there every Friday, always making perfect pasta and telling jokes for hours. One day, he looked at me and said, "You got sadness in your eyes, kid, but also fire. Don't let the sadness put out that fire, capice?" I just smiled, but his words touched something deep inside me, stirring a pain I'd try to forget. Late at night, back in my dorm, I'd sit at my desk and open Mom's recipe book. I wrote in it about everything, from the joy of mastering a difficult sauce to the loneliness of watching other students call home to share their day with families who cared. I didn't call Riverside. Dad called sometimes, but our talks were always short and awkward. "How are you doing, Marcus?" he'd ask. "I'm fine," I'd answer, even though I was struggling every day. I didn't want him to know how hard it was. I didn't want him to think I was giving up. Linda, of course, never called me once. I learned from Dad that she and her 2 kids were still living with him, that Tyler was working at the car shop, and Madison was studying nursing at the community college. These updates made me feel like an outsider, like I was never really part of that family anyway. But strangely, their coldness didn't hurt as much anymore. I was creating my own life, and that's what mattered most to me. School wasn't just about studying and working. I started making real friends, people who knew nothing about my past. Jake became my best friend. He'd drag me to watch Yankees games or take me to loud student parties where I'd usually stand in a corner holding a Coke and watching everyone else have fun. "You gotta relax more, Marcus," Jake would say, patting my back. I'd smile, but I knew my careful nature wasn't something I could just turn off. In my second year, I met Emma in a pastry class. She had long blonde hair and blue eyes that sparkled when she laughed. She sat next to me, asked to borrow sugar, and we started talking from there. Emma was different from anyone I'd ever known. She was honest, funny, but also gentle. Once when I mentioned my mom, she took my hand and said, "Losing someone you love is the hardest thing ever, but you're here fighting. That's really brave." I didn't know what to say, but for the first time in years, I felt like someone really understood me. Emma and I became close friends, then something more. We'd study together, staying in the kitchen lab until midnight, sharing leftover desserts and talking about our dreams. She wanted to open a bakery to make people happy with beautiful cakes. I told her about my dream of opening a restaurant, not just to make money, but to bring communities together, a place where families could make memories over good food. Emma always listened, and sometimes her smile made me believe those dreams could really happen. But life wasn't always smooth sailing. Some days I felt exhausted from balancing school, work, and emotions still, bubbling inside from my past. One night, while working late at Marco's, I got a call from Dad. His voice sounded shaky, not like his usual strong self. "Marcus, I want you to come home for Thanksgiving. The family misses you." I felt anger and hurt rising in my chest. Family? What family? The one that pushed me aside and let Linda and her kids treat me like garbage? I told him I was busy with important exams and hung up, but afterwards I sat in the restaurant's empty dining room, hands shaking, wondering if I was being too hard on him. That Thanksgiving, I didn't go back to Riverside. I stayed in New York, picking up extra shifts to make money and avoid the loneliness. Jake invited me to his girlfriend's apartment for dinner, and I had a wonderful evening with people who treated me like family. But back in my dorm room, I opened Mom's recipe book and cried. I missed her, missed the Thanksgivings when she was alive, and our house felt like home. I wondered if I'd ever feel that warmth. Again, anywhere. In my third year, I joined the school's entrepreneur club. It was where I learned to turn cooking dreams into real business plans, where I met students full of ambition and passion. I pitched an idea for a community restaurant that would hire local people and serve affordable, healthy food. My project got selected for a citywide student business competition, and for the first time ever, I felt truly valuable. The night before the presentation, I stayed up practicing in front of my mirror, imagining Mom sitting. They're cheering me on with her beautiful smile. The presentation went better than my wildest dreams. My team won first place, and a famous chef offered me an internship at his restaurant in Miami. That was the turning point in my whole life. I started believing I could achieve something amazing, that I wasn't just a kid Linda's family pushed around and ignored. But the happiness didn't last long. A few days later, I got a letter from Riverside, not from Dad, but from Linda. The letter was short and cold, telling me that Dad wanted me to come work at Thompson Motors after graduation. Robert thinks you might have some potential, though I still have my doubts, she wrote. I tore that letter into tiny pieces, angry enough to scream at the ceiling. Linda, who never saw me as real family, now wanted to control my future plans. I decided right then that I would never return to Riverside, never work at Thompson Motors. I would create my own path in life. My final year at culinary school flew by faster than I expected. I took on more jobs, from catering events to teaching cooking classes to kids. I saved every dollar I earned, not because I was cheap, but because I wanted security so I'd never have to depend on anyone ever again. Emma stayed close to me as a friend and study partner, and sometimes I wondered if I was falling in love with her. But I wasn't ready to open my heart completely. The shadow of my past still felt too big and dark. At graduation, I sat in the auditorium watching families cheer for their loved ones. Dad didn't come. He sent a card with some money that I never spent. I wasn't angry exactly, just sad knowing the distance between us had grown too wide to cross. I left New York with my culinary degree and a huge dream. I planned to move to Miami, where the famous chef had offered me that internship, where I could start my restaurant career on my own terms, creating community spaces and affordable good food for regular families. But life, as Mom once told me, has a way of forcing you to face the things you run from. Just 2 months after graduation, a phone call from Dad pulled me back to Riverside, the place I swore I'd never see again. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was sitting in my small Miami apartment, looking through job offers from several restaurants. The phone rang and Dad's voice came through, quiet but heavy with sadness. "Marcus, I need you to come home. Thompson Motors needs you now." I went silent, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Home? Home was where Linda called me a burden, and Tyler and Madison made fun of everything I cared about. But Dad's voice had no room for argument. "This is our family legacy, Marcus. You're my heir. I'm getting old and tired," he said, and I could hear years of exhaustion in those words. I wanted to say no, to yell that I didn't need Thompson Motors, that I could make it fine without their help. But part of me, the part that still wanted Dad's approval, hesitated. I thought about the times he showed me around the car shop, the old photos on his office wall, the legacy he and Grandpa had built together. I wondered if this was my chance to prove I wasn't the failure Linda always said I was. So against every smart instinct I had, I said yes. I packed my things, said goodbye to Miami dreams, promised Emma I'd keep in touch, and went back to Riverside. As the plane descended toward home, I saw the "Welcome to Riverside, Ohio" sign, and my stomach churned with anxiety. The old White House looked exactly the same, still big but feeling cold as ice. Linda stood at the front door with her fake plastic smile. "Marcus, it's been so many years," she said in that syrupy voice I remembered. I nodded, said nothing, and walked inside feeling like a stranger visiting a haunted house. Thompson Motors sat on Main Street, a large building with shiny glass windows and Dad's name painted in blue letters. Dad met me in his office, giving me a quick, uncomfortable hug. "You've grown into a man," he said, his eyes filled with something like regret. I wanted to ask why he didn't come to my graduation, why he let Linda control our family. But I kept quiet. I knew I wasn't there to open old wounds, just to work. He introduced me to the mechanics, calling me the one who'll take over someday. I saw doubtful looks from some workers, especially from Tyler, now 24, wearing a cocky grin. He worked in the parts department, a job I'm sure Linda arranged for him. Madison, now a pretty 23-year-old, handled customer service and appointments. Linda, of course, had no real job title, but showed up to every meeting like a queen controlling her kingdom. My first position was assistant manager, which Dad said was to test my abilities. But I quickly realized it was Linda's way of keeping me under control. She and Tyler wanted me stuck in a low position while they grabbed power in the company. They gave me boring tasks like organizing files, updating computer records, even cleaning the waiting room like I was a janitor instead of the owner's son. I gritted my teeth and did the work, determined to prove I wasn't worthless. I spent nights studying the shop's history, reading every document I could find. Thompson Motors used to be about helping regular families keep their cars, running affordably. But under Linda's influence, it had shifted toward expensive luxury car sales and overpriced repairs for rich customers. I saw this as betraying what Dad had taught me about helping the community, betraying everything Thompson Motors was supposed to represent. This also went against everything I believed in. I started suggesting new ideas in staff meetings. I talked about offering payment plans for low-income families, partnering with local schools for car maintenance classes, and bringing back affordable service options. A few older mechanics supported my ideas, but Linda and Tyler always shut them down with mean comments. "Marcus, you're still young and naive. You don't understand business," Tyler said in that condescending tone. Linda would smile sweetly and say things like, "Nice thoughts, honey, but we need to focus on profits." Dad, who should have supported me, just sat there silently, staring out the window. His silence hurt more than Linda's insults. I wanted him to speak up, to defend me like he did when I was little, but he didn't. I began to wonder whether he really wanted me to inherit the business or just call me back because he felt guilty. The breaking point came during a meeting about a new project, an expensive renovation that Tyler and Linda were pushing hard. It would mean raising all our prices and focusing only on wealthy customers. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I stood up, my voice trembling but strong, and presented a different plan. Keep prices fair, hire more local workers, and create a program to help struggling families. This isn't just about making money, I said. It's about our duty to help people in this community. The room went dead silent. I looked at Dad, praying he'd support me, but he just sighed deeply and said, "Marcus, you're too idealistic. Tyler's plan is already approved. We can't change it now." His words felt like a knife through my heart. Tyler smirked like he'd won a game. Linda clapped her hands like she'd just watched entertainment. My blood boiled with rage, but I didn't say anything. I grabbed my papers and walked out of that meeting, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. That night, I sat in my old bedroom staring at photos of Mom and me hanging on the wall. I called Emma, the only person I felt could really understand my pain. "I don't belong here, Emma," I said, my voice breaking. "I tried so hard, but they don't want me here." She listened quietly, then said, "Marcus, you don't need to prove anything to them. You're amazing just as you are." Her words helped, but they couldn't take away the sting of Dad betrayal. I started planning to leave Riverside again. I didn't want to live in Linda's shadow or work for a business that went against my values. But part of me still wanted to stay and fight, to save Thompson Motors, to reclaim the legacy Dad and Grandpa had built with their own hands. I felt torn between loyalty to Dad and my desperate desire for freedom and respect. One morning, I went to shop early, hoping to have a private talk with Dad. I knocked on his office door, but heard no answer. I pushed it open and found him slumped at his desk, holding an old photo of Mom and me at Christmas. I froze, not sure what to do next. He looked up with tired, watery eyes. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm sorry. I haven't been the father you deserved. For the first time in years, I saw Dad looking vulnerable and broken. I wanted to hug him, to say I forgave everything, but I couldn't move. Too much hurt had piled up between us. I just nodded and left the room, carrying a confusing mix of pain and hope. Maybe deep down, the father who once loved me was still in there somewhere. But that tiny hope didn't last very long. In the next meeting, Tyler openly criticized my work in front of all the employees, calling my ideas childish and stupid. Linda laughed out loud, and Dad said absolutely nothing to defend me. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, looked directly at Dad, and said, if this is how you want to run your business, then I don't belong here at all. I walked out, ignoring every pair of eyes following me. That night, I packed all my belongings, determined to leave Riverside forever this time. I didn't know exactly where I'd go, but I knew I couldn't stay in that toxic place. Another day, I wrote a long letter to Dad, saying I wasn't angry at him, but I needed to find my own way in life. I left it on his desk and drove away from Riverside at sunrise, carrying both deep pain and a feeling of liberation. I drove for hours with no clear destination, just knowing I needed to get far away. I kept driving, stopping to rest, then driving more, as if putting distance between me and the past would somehow heal the wounds. After nearly 2 weeks of wandering through different states, sleeping in cheap motels, I decided Miami would be my final destination. That's where I'd start writing my own success story. I chose Miami for one simple reason. It was as far from Riverside as I could get while staying in America. I had no solid plan, no connections, no job waiting for me. Just my culinary degree, a few $1,000s in savings, and a burning dream to create a restaurant that brought communities together. When I stepped off the plane into Miami's warm, humid air, breathing in the salty ocean breeze mixed with the smell of Cuban coffee from street vendors, this vibrant city with its colorful buildings, and sudden thunderstorms seemed to promise a fresh beginning. The first weeks in Miami were incredibly challenging. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Little Havana, where the walls were paper-thin and the sound of salsa music played through the night. My savings disappeared faster than I expected, and I had to find work immediately. I got hired as a line cook at a small family restaurant called Abuela's Kitchen, which specialized in authentic Cuban food. The work wasn't glamorous at all. I mostly chopped vegetables, cleaned pots, and took orders from the head chef, but it gave me a chance to learn from people truly passionate about feeding their community with love. The restaurant's owner, Carlos Mendez, was a short Cuban man in his 60s with graying hair and kind brown eyes, but rough hands from years of hard work. He noticed my dedication and often asked for my opinions during busy lunch rushes. Even though I was just a new guy, once when I suggested adding a healthy kids menu, he smiled and said, "You have good instincts, Marcus. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." His words reminded me of Mom, of the encouraging notes in her recipe book, and I felt strength growing inside me again. But life in Miami wasn't always easy or fun. Some nights I lay on my uncomfortable futon, staring at water stains on the ceiling, wondering if I was making the right choices. I missed Emma deeply, our late-night conversations, her encouraging smile that made everything seem possible. We kept in touch through phone calls and texts, but the distance in our busy schedules made our talks less frequent than before. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus," she said during one call. "But don't forget to enjoy life too, okay?" I smiled and promised I would, but deep inside I knew I was, racing against myself. Try to prove I didn't need Riverside or Thompson Motors to succeed. My first year in Miami, I worked like a man possessed by ambition. I learned to cook traditional Cuban dishes, manage inventory, and work with suppliers from all over the city. Abuela's Kitchen wasn't as big or successful as some fancy restaurants, but here I felt appreciated and respected. I started leading a project to create a community dinner program, cooking affordable meals for local families struggling to make ends meet. I spent countless hours researching recipes, sourcing fresh ingredients, and coordinating with neighborhood organizations. When the program launched, Seeing families enjoy nutritious meals they could actually afford brought me more joy than I'd felt since Mom was alive. But success never comes easily or quickly. Some days I worked until I collapsed from exhaustion, falling asleep on the restaurant's office couch surrounded by recipe notes and supplier catalogs. There were times when investors rejected my ideas, calling me too idealistic for talking about community service over pure profit. Once potential backer looked me in the eye and said, "You're young, Marcus. The restaurant business doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about money." I smiled politely, but inside I was furious and determined. I refused to become someone who chased profits at any cost, like Linda and Tyler had done with Thompson Motors. To pay my bills and save money, I took a weekend job bartending at a busy sports bar called the End Zone. The work was exhausting with late hours and drunk customers who sometimes got aggressive, but it taught me patience and how to handle stress under pressure. One Saturday night, while wiping down the bar counter, I overheard a customer talking about his son, a young man who'd moved across the country to escape a toxic family situation. The story made me think about Dad, about the letter I'd left on his desk in Riverside. I wondered if he'd ever read it, if he ever thought about me, but I quickly pushed those thoughts away. I couldn't let the past drag me backward when I was finally moving forward. In my second year in Miami, I began building a solid reputation in the local food scene. Abuela's Kitchen's community dinner program caught the attention of local newspapers and food bloggers, and my name appeared in an article titled, "Young Chef Changing Lives One Meal at a Time." Carlos called me into his small office, patted my shoulder like a proud father, and said, "You're doing incredible work, Marcus, but this is just the beginning of something bigger." He offered me the opportunity to become head chef and help him open a second location in downtown Miami. I accepted eagerly, knowing it would be my biggest professional challenge yet. After nearly 4 years of relentless hard work, the second Abuela's Kitchen location opened its doors to the public. On opening day, I stood in the bustling dining room, watching families laugh together over plates of food I had prepared with my own hands, and I felt tears of pride and joy. I thought about Mom, her recipe book, her words telling me never to doubt my worth. I had done it, not with Thompson Motors, not with Dad's help, but completely on my own terms. But life has this strange way of pulling you back to where you started, whether you want to go or not. One morning, as I prepared for a big catering event, my phone rang with bad news that would change everything. A woman's shaky voice introduced herself as a hospice nurse who had cared for Dad during his final days. "Mr. Robert passed away yesterday, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I need to meet you urgently. There are important things you need to know about what really happened." My heart felt like it stopped beating. Dad was gone, and why hadn't anyone bothered to tell me? And what secrets was this nurse talking about? I dropped everything at the restaurant and booked the first flight back to Riverside. I didn't know what I'd face when I got there, but I knew the past, despite all my efforts to escape it, was calling me back home. I looked out the airplane window, watching clouds drift over unknown cities, and told myself that no matter what happened in Riverside, I wouldn't let anyone destroy what I'd built in Miami. The rain was falling softly on Riverside's familiar streets as I returned to the town after nearly 6 years away. I didn't drive to the old house, but went straight to Peterson Funeral Home on Oak Avenue. It was a small brick building with white columns and stained glass windows. As I walked inside, the smell of roses hit me, mixing with the cold air conditioning that made me shiver. I recognized a few faces from the past, some Thompson Motors employees, old neighbors from my childhood, but nobody wanted to make eye contact with me. They whispered behind their hands, glancing at me sideways like I was a ghost returning from the dead. Then I saw them across the room, Linda, Tyler, and Madison, standing near Dad's wooden casket like they owned the place. Linda, now in her late 50s, still kept her polished appearance with perfectly styled red hair and an expensive black dress. Tyler, his face showing signs of too much drinking, was talking to a man I didn't recognize. Madison, more beautiful than I remembered, stood with her arms crossed, her eyes cold and unwelcoming when they met mine. They didn't notice me at first, but when I walked toward them, All three turned around, and the entire room's atmosphere seemed to freeze solid. Marcus, Linda spoke first, her voice sweet like honey but sharp like broken glass. What are you doing here? The way she said my name, like I was some unwelcome stranger, made my blood pressure spike. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm and controlled. I'm here to say goodbye to my father, I said, my voice steady but firm. I have every right to be here, Linda. She smirked, stepping closer in her clicking high heels on the wooden floor. Rights? She laughed bitterly. You abandoned Robert, abandoned this family completely. You think you could just show up here now like some kind of hero? She looked at Tyler and Madison as if asking for their support and backup. Madison nodded in agreement, and Tyler stepped forward, looking me up and down like I was trash. You're here for the inheritance money, aren't you? Tyler said, his tone full of disgust and accusation. Don't pretend you actually cared about Dad. He didn't need you, and we sure don't need you now. I clenched my fists, fighting hard to control my rising anger. I wanted to shout that I never cared about Dad's money, that I just wanted to see him one last time and pay my respects. But I knew arguing with them would be completely pointless. They'd already created a story in their minds where I was the villain, the greedy son who abandoned his family. I looked past Tyler toward the beautiful oak casket in the center of the room, covered in white lilies and red roses. Dad lay there peacefully, and I wasn't emotionally ready to accept that he was gone forever from this world. I'm not here to fight with anyone, I said, stepping around Tyler toward the casket. But Linda quickly blocked my path, pressing her hand firmly against my chest, her green eyes sharp like daggers. You're not allowed anywhere near him, she said, her voice low but threatening as a snake. Robert was my husband, the father of Tyler and Madison. You're no longer part of this family. Her cruel words pierced my heart like ice. I stared at her, then at Tyler and Madison, who stood behind her with satisfied smirks on their faces. I wanted to push her aside, to scream that I was Dad's biological son, that nobody could prevent me from saying goodbye to him. But I saw all the curious eyes watching us, filled with pity and judgment, and I knew that making a scene would only prove they were right about me being a troublemaker. Linda, I said, my voice calm but ice cold with controlled fury. You don't get to decide who Dad's real family is. I'm staying for this funeral, and I will pay my respects to him. If you want to try stopping me, call the police. But I'm warning you, I know exactly what my legal rights are. She froze completely, clearly not expecting such a confident, firm response from me. Tyler stepped forward, about to say something aggressive, but Linda raised her hand to silence him before he could speak. Fine, Marcus, she said, her fake smile returning but filled with pure venom. You can stay if you insist, but don't think for 1 second you'll get anything from Robert's estate. He left everything to us, his real family. I didn't bother responding to her threats. I didn't care about any inheritance or Thompson Motors anymore. I just wanted to say goodbye to Dad, to stand beside him one final time and make peace with our complicated relationship. I stepped past Linda toward the casket, where Dad lay with his eyes closed, looking peaceful like he was just taking a nap. My throat tightened with emotion, and tears threatened to spill down my cheeks. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered quietly, my hand gently touching the casket's smooth edge. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you needed me most. The next few hours felt like I was moving through a strange dream. I took charge of funeral arrangements despite the cold stare from Linda and her children. I chose Dad's favorite song, Take Me Home, Country Roads, the one Mom used to play on summer car rides when I was little. I wrote a heartfelt eulogy about memories from my childhood when Dad was the man who taught me how to change oil and shared his dreams of building the best car shop in Ohio. I didn't mention Linda or the years of painful separation and misunderstandings. I just wanted people to remember Dad as I once knew him before everything went wrong between us. But Linda wouldn't give me a moment of peace during the entire service. Throughout the funeral, she whispered constantly to Tyler and Madison, pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal intruder who didn't belong there. When I stood up to deliver Dad's eulogy, Tyler coughed loudly and deliberately, trying to disrupt and embarrass me. Several people turned to stare, but I didn't let him stop me. I kept speaking, my voice shaking with emotion but strong with determination. When I finished reading the eulogy, I noticed a few of Thompson Motors' longtime employees nodding with tears in their eyes. They understood and remembered. They knew who Dad really was before Linda changed everything. After the funeral service ended and people began leaving, Linda pulled me aside to a quiet corner. "You think you're so clever and righteous, don't you?" she hissed, her voice low but filled with pure hatred. "You can stand there pretending to grieve and mourn, but don't you dare dream of taking anything that belonged to Robert. His was already written and official, and your name isn't mentioned anywhere in it." I looked at her, feeling more tired than angry after this long, emotional day. "I don't care about your will, Linda," I said honestly. "I came here for Dad, not for his money or possessions." She laughed like she didn't believe a word I said, then turned and walked away, pulling Tyler and Madison along behind her like obedient puppies. That night, I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of Riverside, because I couldn't bear to sleep in the old family house where every corner held memories of happier days and painful betrayals. I lay in the uncomfortable bed staring at water stains on the ceiling, tried to remember Dad's face in the casket, and wondering if he knew how hard I tried to make him proud, if he knew I still loved him despite all the years of hurt and distance between us. The next morning, as I packed my bags to return to Miami and leave Riverside forever, a woman appeared in the motel lobby looking nervous and scared. She wore a light blue nurse's uniform, her graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, and her worried brown eyes kept darting around like she was afraid someone might be watching us. "Mr. Thompson?" she asked, her voice soft but certain of my identity. "I'm the one who called you about your father. I was his private nurse during his final months." My heart started pounding with anticipation and dread. "Who are you exactly?" I asked, trying to stay calm and composed. "And what do you need to tell me about Dad?" She glanced around the lobby nervously as if afraid someone dangerous might overhear our conversation, then handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with tape. "This is what Mr. Roberts specifically wanted me to give you, and only you," she said urgently. "But you need to be extremely careful with this information. There are people who definitely don't want you to know these truths." I took the heavy envelope, feeling its weight like it contained the secrets of the universe. I wanted to tear it open immediately, but the nurse's anxious expression stopped me cold. "Read it somewhere completely safe and private," she whispered then, turned quickly and disappeared into the crowd of people on Riverside's busy Main Street. I returned to my motel room, locked the door, drew the curtains, and carefully opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were handwritten letters from Dad, along with legal documents and a notarized will I'd never seen before. I read the first few lines, and my heart felt like it completely stopped beating. "Marcus, my beloved son, I'm so sorry for everything that happened between us. I need you to know the real truth." Dad's shaky handwriting looked like it was written by someone in tremendous pain, both physical and emotional. His letter was long and detailed, filled with regret and secrets he kept buried during his final years of life. He wrote that after Mom died, he fell into such a deep depression that he couldn't think clearly, and Linda appeared like a lifeline when he was drowning in grief and loneliness. He thought she would bring stability and happiness back to our broken family, but he was terribly wrong about her true character. Linda wasn't the woman I believed she was, he wrote in his trembling handwriting. She manipulated and controlled me, Marcus, and I was too emotionally weak and blind to see what she was doing to us. The letter revealed shocking details that made my hands shake with anger. Dad wrote that Linda had complete control over all his communications, his email, phone calls, even his mail, prevented him from reaching out to me or even knowing how to contact me in Miami. She told him repeatedly that I hated him, that I'd completely cut off contact because I no longer want him as my father and never wanted to see him again. I stopped reading for a moment, tears blurring the handwritten pages. I remembered those few awkward phone calls from Dad when I was in culinary school, the way his voice sounded so tired and defeated when he'd ask, "How are you doing, son?" with such sadness. I thought he didn't care about my life or my dreams. But now I understood the horrible truth. Linda had built an invisible wall of lies between us, feeding him poisonous stories to make him believe I was the one who had abandoned our relationship. The letter continued with even more disturbing revelations that made my stomach turn. Dad wrote that Linda and Tyler had pressured and manipulated him into writing a fake will that completely excluded me from all his assets, including his ownership shares in Thompson Motors that should have been my inheritance. They made me feel like I was a complete failure as a father, he wrote with obvious pain. I let them control and manipulate me, Marcus. But in my final months when I was dying, I realized the truth and tried to make things right between us. He explained that by the time I read his letter, he would probably be gone, but he'd secretly drafted a new, real will. All my assets, the house, cars, the boat, the vacation cabin, and my controlling shares in Thompson Motors, I leave entirely to you to decide their fate. You're the only person I trust to carry on our family legacy with honor. He ended by begging for my forgiveness for all the pain I'd endured. Besides Dad's emotional letter, the envelope contained other shocking evidence. Printed emails, handwritten notes, and digital audio recordings that Dad had secretly kept hidden from Linda. One recording was particularly damning. A private conversation between Linda and a man named Vincent Cross, who owned a competing car dealership across town. In the recording, Linda promised to sell Thompson Motors' most valuable assets to Cross at ridiculously low prices in exchange for a massive cash payment transferred directly to her personal bank account. I listened with growing horror as Linda's voice, cold and calculating as a snake, discussed Dad's business like it was just merchandise for her personal profit. Robert will never find out about this deal, she told Cross confidently. He's dying anyway, and that worthless brat Marcus ran away years ago and will never come back. The truth hit me like a physical blow, leaving me, trembling with rage and overwhelming sadness. Dad had discovered the truth about Linda's manipulation and betrayal, had tried desperately to reconnect with me and make amends, but he ran out of time before he could reach me. I thought about all the years I'd spent blaming him, all the times I'd refused to call home or visit, and my heart felt like it was breaking into a million pieces. But I also realized this wasn't the time to drown myself in regret and guilt. I needed to take action, not just for Dad's memory, but for myself, to protect his. Life's work and expose Linda's lies and fraud to everyone. The next day, I contacted Henry Williams, Dad's longtime personal lawyer, who'd worked with Thompson Motors since before I was born. Mr. Williams was a distinguished man with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I met him at his downtown office, where law books were stacked from floor to ceiling, and the smell of old paper filled the air. When I showed him Dad's envelope with all the evidence, he read every document carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Marcus," he said gravely, his voice low and concerned, "these are extremely important legal documents. If everything you've shown me is authentic and true, then Linda and Tyler have committed serious fraud and possibly criminal theft." Mr. Williams explained that the fake will Linda had presented after Dad's funeral could be completely overturned in court if we could prove the authenticity of the real will Dad had written. He also said the audio recording of Linda's conversation with Vincent Cross could serve as powerful evidence in both civil and criminal cases if we decided to pursue legal action against her. I nodded, understanding that this fight would be difficult and possibly ugly, but I was no longer the scared 13-year-old boy Linda used to call worthless and unwanted. I'd built a successful career in Miami, faced challenges I never thought I could overcome, and learned to stand up for myself. I absolutely would not let Linda steal Dad's legacy or destroy everything he'd worked to build. Linda, somehow sensing the approaching threat to her plans, began spreading vicious rumors throughout Riverside. She told anyone who would listen that I'd returned to town like a vulture, trying to steal the inheritance from Dad's real family, and that I was an opportunist taking advantage of a grieving widow. Some old neighbors who'd known me as a child started looking at me with suspicion and judgment, whispering behind my back. But I didn't care what they thought anymore. I knew the truth, and I had solid evidence in my hands to prove Linda's lies and manipulation. I called Carlos at Abuela's Kitchen in Miami and requested additional time off to handle urgent family business. "I need to stay in," Riverside take care of some important legal matters, Carlos. I explained, trying to keep my voice steady despite the stress. With his usual understanding and kindness, he immediately agreed to give me the time I needed. Take care of your family situation, Marcus. We'll manage everything here until you get back, he said, and I felt grateful to have such supportive people in my life. I began quietly investigating Linda's recent activities and behavior. Each morning, I left my motel room early, rented an inconspicuous car to avoid being recognized, and discreetly observed the old family house, where Linda still lived with Tyler and Madison, as if Dad's death meant nothing to them. I watched them coming and going at all hours, sometimes laughing and celebrating like they didn't have a care in the world, which made my blood boil with righteous anger. Dad had spent his entire adult life building Thompson Motors from nothing, and now they were planning to sell it off piece by piece for their personal profit. About 10 days after Dad's funeral, I noticed something very suspicious and important. One afternoon, I saw Linda, Tyler, and Madison leave the house together in Dad's expensive black Cadillac, all dressed in formal business attire like they were going to an important meeting. My instincts told me to follow them, so I kept a safe distance behind their car to avoid detection. Their car stopped in front of a professional office building in downtown Riverside with a sign that read Morrison and Associates Law Firm. My heart started racing with anticipation. I was almost certain they were there to finalize something related to Dad's will and estate. I parked across the street and watched from a distance as Linda strutted into the office building with complete confidence, while Tyler and Madison followed behind her like loyal servants. I immediately called Mr. Williams on my cell phone and told him to meet me at Morrison and Associates as quickly as possible. Mr. Williams was quiet for a moment before responding with concern in his voice. Marcus, I know that law firm well. They specialize in handling large inheritance cases and estate planning. If Linda's meeting there, she's probably trying to make the fake will official and legally binding. Do you have the real will and all the evidence with you right now? Yes, I replied, patting the envelope in my jacket pocket, where I kept it at all times. I never go anywhere without it. Perfect, Mr. Williams said with determination. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We're going to put an end to this fraud once and for all. I waited in my rental car, heart pounding like a drum, thinking about Dad and his heartfelt letter apologizing for all the pain and misunderstanding between us. I couldn't let Linda win this battle. I couldn't let her steal what Dad had wanted me to have and destroy the legacy he'd spent his life building. When Mr. Williams arrived in his silver sedan, wearing his best Navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase, I felt a surge of confidence return to my chest. Let's go, Marcus, he said with sharp, determined eyes. We're going to end the charade right now. We entered Morrison and Associates' office building, where the air was cool and professional, smelling of fresh coffee and expensive leather furniture. The young receptionist looked up, slightly surprised by our unexpected arrival. We need to see Mr. Morrison immediately, Mr. Williams said in his authoritative lawyer voice. It's regarding the Robert Thompson estate case, and we have urgent new evidence. The receptionist hesitated briefly, but after a quick phone call to her supervisor, she led us to a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Riverside. Linda, Tyler, and Madison were already seated around a polished conference table with Mr. Morrison, a heavy-set man, with thick glasses and an expensive suit. When Linda saw me and Mr. Williams walk into the room, she literally jumped out of her chair, her face turning completely white with shock and fear. "What is he doing here?" she shouted, her voice cracking with panic and anger. "This is a private family meeting." "Sit down, Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Williams said calmly but firmly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of legal experience. He turned to address Mr. Morrison directly, placing Dad's real will and evidence on the conference table. "I'm the attorney representing Marcus Thompson, the rightful heir of Robert Thompson's estate. We have concrete evidence that the will Mrs. Linda presented to you is completely fraudulent and forged." The entire room went silent as a tomb. Mr. Morrison picked up the documents with obvious concern, his expression growing more grave and serious as he read each page carefully. Linda tried desperately to interrupt and object. "It's all fake," she screamed, her voice high-pitched and desperate. Marcus is trying to deceive everyone with forged documents. I stepped forward confidently, locking eyes with Linda for the first time in years. You manipulated and controlled my father, Linda. I said, my voice quiet but powerful with conviction. You kept him from contacting me, forced him to write a fake will, and now you're planning to sell Thompson Motors assets to Vincent Cross for your personal profit. I have all the proof right here. The recordings, emails, everything. Tyler, who had been sitting silently nearby, suddenly turned bright red with rage and embarrassment. He stood up so quickly his chair crashed backwards to the floor. Marcus, you lying piece of... Before he could finish his threat, Mr. Morrison looked up from the documents with an expression of shocked disbelief and professional concern. Mrs. Thompson, Tyler, these are extremely serious accusations and allegations. If these documents are verified as authentic by our forensic experts, you could be facing severe civil lawsuits and even criminal charges for fraud and theft. Linda collapsed back into her chair like a deflated balloon, her face completely drained of color and confidence. Tyler tried to speak again, but his voice came out as a weak stutter, and Madison began crying softly into her hands. I looked at all three of them, feeling not triumph or revenge, but a deep sadness for how greed and jealousy had corrupted them completely. They'd had everything they could want, a comfortable home, financial security, and Dad's love and protection. But their endless greed drove them to try stealing what wasn't rightfully theirs. I took a deep breath and spoke to Mr. Morrison with calm authority. Sir, I don't want to pursue criminal charges or drag this through years of ugly court battles. I just want justice for my father and his memory. I demand that Linda, Tyler, and Madison leave my family's property, immediately and permanently, and never return to Riverside or interfere with Thompson Motors again. If they agree to these terms and leave quietly, I won't take further legal action against them. Linda stared at me with a mixture of shock, hatred, and something that might have been grudging respect. You think you're being so noble and generous, she hissed through clenched teeth, but her voice had lost all its power and venom. Mr. Williams raised his hand diplomatically, cutting off any further argument. Mrs. Thompson, I strongly advise you to accept Marcus's very generous offer, he said professionally. If this case goes to court, you'll lose far more than just a house. You could face prison time and financial ruin. After a long, tense silence that felt like it lasted forever, Linda nodded slowly, her lips pressed together in bitter defeat. Tyler and Madison said absolutely nothing, just stared at the table with their heads bowed in shame as they followed their mother toward the door like beaten dogs. Mr. Morrison promised to have all the documents verified by independent experts and ensure that Dad's real will was properly executed according to Ohio state law. As the conference room door closed behind them with finality, I felt like an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but it also left a hollow emptiness in my heart. I'd won the battle and secured justice for Dad, but the cost was years of family estrangement, words that could never be taken back, and relationships that were broken beyond any hope of repair. I stayed in Riverside for 2 more weeks to finalize all the legal matters related to Dad's will and estate. Mr. Williams worked tirelessly, ensuring that every single asset from Thompson Motors to the family house was legally transferred to my name without any complications. Linda, just as I had demanded, moved out of the house the very next day with Tyler and Madison. I heard through town gossip that they relocated to Columbus where Linda had distant relatives, but I didn't care where they went as long as they stayed out of my life forever. The old White House was now mine, but I decided to transform it into something positive for the community, a culinary training center where young people could learn cooking skills and start food service careers. Thompson Motors would continue operating, but with a renewed focus on serving working families with honest prices and quality service, just like Dad had originally envisioned. My story ends not with revenge, but with the understanding that truth and justice always win in the end, and that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to build a better future.